This week we've been considering James chapter 1 and verse number 2. Consider it all joy when you fall into various trials. Today, as we begin to wrap up our discussion on this idea of rejoicing in trials, what I want us to do is talk about some principles that will enable a faith to rejoice. Hebrews chapter 11 has sometimes been called the Hall of Fame of Faith. And I want us to look at some principles there, and let's start with the great man of faith, Abraham. And in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 8, we find two great principles there. Verse number 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went, not knowing where he was going. Now I want you to think about this. Number one, Abraham listened to God. God called Abraham, and Abraham listened to God. If you want to have the ability to rejoice in the midst of trials and problems in your life, you have to be the kind of individual that you'll listen to God. Now, what do we mean by listening to God? Is God going to come to us in the middle of the night and shake us and wake us up and have a private conversation with us? No. We know that God speaks to us through His Word. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 16 tells us that all Scripture is inspired by God, or literally God-breathed. And we know that that's the way that God calls us. In John chapter 6 and verse 44 and 45, that's the way God calls us. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father, Jesus said, would come to Him. So it's through the process of learning and listening to God that we come to Him. But also, along with that, did you notice that the text says that he obeyed God? He listened to God and he obeyed God. Now that's very important. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 9 says that Jesus is the author of eternal salvation to all those who obey Him. That's so crucial for us to be the kind of people that will listen to God, but then do what God says. And within the pages of this book, we're laid out precepts and commands that we're to follow. Matthew chapter 7 verse 21, very important verse. It says, not everyone, these are the very words of Jesus, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. There's a lot of folks that say, oh, you don't have to do anything. And Jesus said you do. As a matter of fact, the King James has that ETH ending. It's a continuous action. We've always got to be willing to do what God says. Are you willing to do that? Thank you for being with us today, and join us tomorrow.